Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 12th Wirelive. And today we are going to be talking all things sustainability. What on earth does sustainability mean in the world of cloud and technology and everything in between and beyond? Is it sunken data centers? Is it frantically replanting trees? Well, hopefully our guest James Cannings will help us figure all that out. Welcome to the stream, James. How you doing?
I'm very good, Rob. It's lovely to be here. I'm very excited to be here. Let's hope we can kind of keep it pithy and to within 45 minutes. The two of us, I know, are hugely passionate about this, but we'll try and keep it condensed if we can.
Yeah, we'll do our best. James and I are not known for our brevity, it has to be said, particularly on subjects like this one. So, James, for our listeners who might not know you, would you mind just giving us a brief introduction to you and your kind of professional journey to this point?
I shall give an introduction, whether it will be brief or not, I don't know, Rob, but I'll try and cover some relevant stuff. So, hello, everybody. I'm James, and I am the Chief Sustainability Officer of MSQ. MSQ are a global digital marketing group at 850 people. I am also, I still wear a couple of hats, the co-founder of one of the agencies within MSQ. So I'm the co-founder of MMT Digital. And I think like a lot of chief sustainability officers, because it is sort of the wild west out there. My background is as a computer scientist and as an entrepreneur and founder of MMT, a digital agency. But in 2019, which was our 20th anniversary, it was sort of the point that I and Ben, my co-founder, kind of wanted to do more, and I sort of accidentally at that point, I think, started to become an expert in carbon footprint modeling and reduction strategies. I, like lots of people out there, wanted to model and understand what our carbon footprint was, just to start as doing the right thing as a business. I know we'll get onto the sort of the technology and the digital side and the clouds and stuff, but I think the starting point for lots of businesses, if you're going to look at that, is to understand your own footprint, have your own reduction strategies in place. And I've just found it incredibly hard. I didn't know what scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 was. I didn't know. I found all these really quite rubbish calculators and modeling tools, and it was all very bitty, and ended up sort of developing my own tools and processes, or if people are interested in that as a starting point, I have a website, netcarbonnegative.co.uk, where those tools, simple spreadsheets, can be downloaded. If anyone watching is a BIMA member, I'm also the co-chair of the BIMA Sustainability Council and train about 60 companies a year. There's a carbon negative course that you can sign up for. So yeah, went on a bit of a journey, and then took MMT Carbon Negative in 2019, and then we rolled that modelling out right across MSQ last year, and MSQ became a carbon negative or climate positive organisation, and we can get into a bit more of that I'm sure in a sec. The other side of it, I think with the BIMA Sustainability Council, was launching earlier this year a site called the Green Pages, which we'll chat about in a bit. So that's a great resource, which is a resource to help any digital team, whether you're a designer, a developer, an architect, an engineer, an infrastructure person, a content media person, on how to measure and build lower carbon digital platforms. The internet has a larger carbon footprint than the airline industry, and so there's a real opportunity to try, although the profile of it is very, very different, but there's a real opportunity to sort of significantly reduce that. So, long introduction, Chief Sustainability Officer. Two areas that I'd love to talk about that hopefully are of interest. One is about being a sustainable business, whether you're a digital agency or whatever you are, how you do that, what you do, how you get started, all of that sort of stuff. And then the other side is part of that thing about spheres of influence, which is a digital agency. It's not about reducing our footprint, but the footprint of our clients by building lower carbon platforms for them, and why that might be important. There you go. I told you it wouldn't be a short introduction, but maybe that.
I mean, by our
tease up some areas we can chat
short,
about. Punchy.
Yeah, by our standards, extremely short. But to just one more sort of paragraph, I suppose, to add. So previously running MMT, which I think was 20 years. Is that right? It certainly was a
Yeah,
was a
it's
good
still
old
going.
journey. Yeah,
The MMT brand, MSQ is a collection, is a group of agencies. MMT is still very much going.
yeah,
Up nearly 200 people now. It's going from strength to strength, and the size and scale of that business is what's enabled me to step away and part and do this role for MSQ, which is lovely.
yeah. And so there we go. Scene set. James is a successful founder, and was previously leading the MMT business. A top quality digital agency that's gone through all of the evolutions that businesses like that have over the last 20 years. And to remain trading after 20 years is a feat to be applauded as an agency, and to be doing it so successfully is even more impressive. So. Um, and it's amazing, as you say, that success has given you a platform now to be able to kind of focus on sustainability professionally. I think my question is, on that 20-year journey, I'm guessing I know the answer to, did you care about this 20 years ago? Certainly as much as you do now, and maybe I'm wrong, but that would be my assumption, because that's what most people would say when I ask them that question. Where in that journey do you think this subject came into that sharp focus for you?
I think the honest answer is no, I didn't care about it as much as I do now. This isn't something I've always been into. I mean, the context of that as well, actually, we're the story actually I'm most proud of is not that we survived for 20 plus years, was actually that we survived the first 2 or 3 years, because we were a bedroom startup that I founded with my buddy Ben when we rolled out of university. So we were just kids, really. So, at that point, founding the business, I'm 21 years old. It's 1999. I couldn't hand on heart say I wanted to set up a business, and from day one, we wanted to be really sustainable. I think in the broadest sense of the term, sustainability, in terms of being, a very ethical business, caring about people, being really involved in the local community, local universities, employing young people, yes, we kind of did that. That was just, I hope, in our nature. I hope Ben and I, if nothing else, are relatively nice people, not cutthroat businessmen. And I think, like you, Rob, with Wirehive, like you can't build up a successful agency if you're not like that. It's that they're people businesses. You've got to look after them. You've got to run them sustainably and ethically and all that side of it. And I guess I was always interested in the outdoors and wildlife and et cetera, et cetera. But it just, hand on heart, like probably a lot of us in our 20s, I couldn't say it was hugely up there. I think what really changed for me mid late 30s was, well, I mean, I had kids in my late 20s, and so they were like 10, 11, coming back from school, and I guess it was sort of round 2, wasn't it? Because there was a lot of this stuff. I remember watching Al Gore's infamous documentary, and there was a lot of like drive towards it. And then I think there was the financial crash, and we all got distracted for 10 years, sort of recovering, and we kind of that lost decade. And I think it was that then coming back on the radar, my girls coming back and asking me about it, and upset about it before they jumped on their iPhones and started TikToking each other or whatever, and not quite seeing the irony of that. But and that 20th anniversary, that was a real point for Ben and I, going, well, hang on, it's got to be more to life than growing, in the next numbers and the next targets and the next 3-year strategy. So no, it was round 2, really. It was 2018, 2019. It was growing up. It was having kids who are asking questions about this, and you start to think about what is your legacy in business as a dad, as a human. So that's when it. So my journey's only been kind of 3 or 4 years, I would say.
Great. Yeah, I love asking that question, because it's amazing how common the answer is 2 or 3 years. And the reason I find that so exciting is because it does seem like something shifted. It really does seem to me like there is a growing public consciousness that this is a problem that needs solutions, and that it is not just going to fix itself, right? And whether that's people caring enough about this subject to tune into an episode like this, or taking personal action as you have, and making it almost the primary focus of your professional life. I just think it's it's incredibly encouraging. So on that, really, so thank you for the introduction. Lovely sort of framing and context for the conversation. The last question I'll ask you before we dive into the meaty stuff is, first question, did you have the storm where you are today?
It's a bit windy. I mean, I'm in Stamford in South Lincolnshire, so we're about as far away from the sea as you can get. So we tend to just sort of get the back end of some wafty breeze. But where are you? You're South
So
Coast, aren't you, Rob?
yeah, I'm by the beach. I'm sort of pretty near
Yeah.
the beach down in Poole, and um, I'm surprised my house is still standing. I thought maybe Mother Nature knew we were going to be having this
You bear
conversation
the brunt.
today, and she was
Well,
reminding us all
it's
how important
topical
it
and
is.
relevant. I was lucky enough to be on a there was a really interesting presentation yesterday morning and keynoted by Chris Stark, who's the chief exec of the Climate Change Committee, and he was giving some really inspiring, information and goals about what they're doing and their goals for 2030, and that was great. But he was talking about kind of global average temperature increases, and actually how on the kind of particularly on the south coast, I think we've gone up, I'm going to misquote this, but something like 1.5 degrees just in the last decade, like some terrifying jump. We always had storms down there. I'm not putting it on that, but just to sort of swing it around to some relevance. It's we could be getting more of those big tropical storms blowing away.
Almost certainly, and unfortunately, it means I can't now ask you the question I always like to ask people after a windy storm, which is, what's the weirdest thing you found in your garden this morning? So I'll answer it for myself, which is, I found one of our garden deck chairs had somehow become neatly folded up and was just in the middle of the lawn, just about 70 meters from where it was before. So yeah, there we go.
Wow.
There's
out Rob with his 70-meter garden. No, I think a couple of cushions blew off the chair, but we'll rebuild and we'll survive.
We'll make it through. Right. Okay, look, let's dive in. So I think it'd be great to just sort of talk a bit about the journey of sustainability for businesses. I think that, in this context of cloud and technology, I think so many companies, like both of ours, work in and around this sphere of tech, whether it's creating digital experiences for clients or, from our end, more on the kind of infrastructure and cloud services side. We're all interfacing with technology somewhere, and technology inevitably has a footprint, in some cases quite a heavy one in terms of its consumption. And so I think there's this sort of interesting collision in, we were talking about motorsport before we went on air. It's like, I think there are all these things that people do in the world that they're probably going to keep doing one way or another, and that's okay. Like I personally don't ever advocate for sort of that cancel culture view of the world of stop doing all these different things. I think it's about modifying the way we do those things to be more sustainable and to to try and leave no trace, as it were, to put back what we take if we are going to draw down. I'd love your view on that sort of that, I suppose, almost philosophical debate, and also maybe that tees us off nicely to talk a bit about, you went on that journey looking for a great calculator, couldn't really find one, built the amazing set of tools. You sort of casually glossed over scope 1, scope 2 in the intro, which is something people who are familiar with this topic often do. I imagine most of our listeners today have no idea what scope 1 and 2 are, so maybe we could just sort of help elaborate a bit there. So what happened, right? What led you to building out this amazing toolkit for businesses? Was it looking for that for yourself and just not being able to find it?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are about 10 questions in there, Rob. I'll try and pick through them. I mean, I think on your first point, for me, it's about, people often say, oh, look, as an individual, what's the point? Or, you're just a small company, what's the point? You're not BP, you're not Shell, and you can keep going up, or but we're just the UK and that's 2% of global emissions. What's the point? And for me, the answer is the same at every level. Yes, it's not about we should regress to the dark ages and completely, reduce our footprint. As an individual, you can do something and take action that might inspire 10 other people. As a company, you can do something that might inspire inspire 10 other companies in your sector, or show the world that your sector, whatever that is, whether you're a coffee shop, whether you're digital agencies like us, can be, high growth, successful companies that are, carbon negative, carbon neutral, aiming to be to net zero, all this sort of stuff. And that as a UK, going up and up, fine, only 2% of emissions or whatever it is, but we can show the world that you can be a high growth economy, net zero economy. Again, it's, for me, it's not about sort of paying back sins of the past, yet finding, we led the industrial age, or this is an opportunity to kind of lead the next stage and show the world that we can do it. Yes, China have got huge emissions, but in part the UK has heavily reduced its own emissions through the reduction of its manufacturing base, and so we do. They are the world's factories, but they are doing a lot, and the technology we develop here at the country level, we can share with the world, and there's huge opportunity there. So I think it kind of just keeps rolling up. So I think that's the first thing, because I think people get quite frustrated, what can I do and what's the point? And I think at all levels actually can all kind of make a huge difference and sort of inspire others. And so look, I went on this journey, learned about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. We don't need to do kind of loads and loads of sort of definitions, but scope 1 are your kind of direct emissions. They're actual fossil fuels that your organization actually burns. Actually, individuals have these emissions as well, so same for individuals. So typically for a service business where we don't have a big manufacturing base with chimneys and pumping great big gases up, your scope 1 is usually just your gas, because you pipe gas in and you burn it on site, so you're burning a fossil fuel on site. And it's also your company fleet vehicles would be the big one, if you have any. We actually don't, because again, you're burning the fuel out of the cars. Scope 2 is basically your electricity, so it's indirect because someone else is burning the fossil fuels for you, or maybe wind turbines. And scope 3 is the big kind of never-ending pile of everything else. But actually, for a service business, it's probably 80 to 90% of your emissions. So when we modeled them, the big chunks in there are the commuting and in-work travel. So it's getting all your teams to and from offices, and it's all of the traveling between offices and to clients that they do, and staying in hotels. And then the other big lump is the purchase of goods and services. And again, without measuring, the reduction strategies that you see people put in place tend to be kind of shuffling deck chairs around. They tend to go after the scope 2. They tend to do things that save electricity. They'll buy low energy toasters and kettles and tinker around, or they'll start to buy sustainable toilet paper and cleaning products. And these are all really good things to do. But actually, even if you chunk down that goods and services pot, again, for most organizations, particularly service businesses, 80% of those are usually actually like the professional services. So it's legal, HR, IT, all of those sort of services that you procure, all the contracting and all that sort of stuff. And so by creating this model, it's really the only way to. And that can be very light touch. Again, it doesn't have to be super scientific. You don't have to spend a year doing it hugely accurately, especially if you're a small business. And again, I've got a very simple calculator you can download off the site I mentioned. And there are others appearing, but they're pretty hopeless. And what we found is that our carbon footprint at 600 tons, this wasn't a number that meant anything to me, that's 6 or 7 tons per person at the time, was fantastically cheap to offset. And so, and I'm choosing my words carefully. I think, getting into offsetting is an interesting conversation. And we do that, as you know, Rob, through the excellent Ecologi platform that you're involved with. It's fantastic. It's a great dashboard, and we can see where we're doing our offsetting. I love the fact that that's typically actually not tree planting. That's usually separated out and something we do separately. It's typically protecting, forests in the first place, or investments in renewables, all those kind of really nice ethical projects that they support, low emission cooking stoves and things like that. And that, because that was really cheap to do, and I'll come back to that, our pledge was to become carbon negative. So no matter how much we reduced our footprint, we will never reduce our offsetting. And I would suggest that any kind of service-based business that doesn't have a huge amount of emissions from manufacturing takes a look at that. Offsetting gets some negative press, and I think you have to choose your words carefully. You hear people, and I heard Chris Stark actually say yesterday, like, offsetting's all right, but really we've got to focus on the reduction stuff. And through a little bit of Chinese whispers, it's even come back to me, and that somebody said to me once, head of Greenpeace or something said that offsetting is a waste of money. And when I looked at what he said, it was, offsetting's not the answer. And through a couple of hops, that had become that. Actually, investment into those projects, whether some of the science of whether a ton is a ton and how many trees is this, whether some of that's debatable, and it certainly isn't scalable. No one disagrees that we can't just go, yep, let's just pile it into that and carry on as we are. It is still the thing you should do day one. Just put the money there, because if we all do that, that is billions of pounds, trillions if everyone does it, going into brilliant schemes. And if they aren't scalable and the measurement isn't quite right, well, fine, we'll figure that out when everybody's signed up to them and there aren't enough places to plant trees or whatever the problem is. They are still a brilliant thing to do. And so for most service businesses, I would suggest do that day one, get offsetting, support those schemes, measure, and then that measurement will allow you to put a carbon reduction strategy in place.
And so, using the tools that you ultimately built, you were able to do that for your own business, and then kindly have published them, as you mentioned, on netcarbonnegative.co.uk, and we'll stick it in the notes for people as well, to help others do it. Which is great, admirable. I applaud you. I think it's an amazing project. As you know, I'm hugely supportive, and I just think it's kind of the context of how we met. Ultimately, was that you did that, and I was involved in ecology, and I just think we need more people like you and I. Not to blow our own trumpets, doing this stuff. We need people taking action and helping others to take action, and building the tools and services to make it straightforward is a big part of how I think technology helps provide the solution to this. I've always been a big believer that technology ultimately will save us all. It's a bit of a grand statement to make, but I love tech because of how it can change and improve people's lives, and I think that certainly doesn't stop at reducing our impact on the planet. I always have to stop myself short of saying save the planet, because as people love reminding me when I say that, the planet will be fine. It's us that will be buggered, right? So this is about saving us from ourselves, really, and being responsible inhabitants.
Yeah, it's my trump
of this rock
card
flying around the sun.
when I'm annoying the exec about trying to kind of move my initiatives forwards. I just kind of remind them that, well, look, I'm only trying to save humanity, guys. I know that sounds, what you're doing sounds really important, but
it's not that big a deal. It's fine. But
well, let's go on to the technology bit then. That's definitely okay. That's interesting.
So the technology, why don't we start by talking a bit about the green pages, another cool project you're involved in? Because I think, as you mentioned already, the web has this sort of vast impact and footprint if you sum it all up. And I know that this definitely divides the crowd, this one. This idea that, building lighter web pages in some way has an impact. So tell us a bit about the green pages and your adventures there.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the sort of headline figure doesn't do what is a much more nuanced and complex situation that the internet is estimated to have probably does have a larger carbon footprint than the airline industry. I think it's 2 or 3% of global emissions, however many billions of tons that is. And actually, when you start to think about it, you go, okay, yeah, that is massive. Actually, calculating the carbon footprint of the internet is probably harder than putting, a man on Mars or a woman on Mars, I would think. If you start to think about it, like, it's not just data centers. but when you click on a website or you load a video, you think about that data traveling from the data center through our telco systems, through fiber optic cables which require power, get bounced around, could be over a 4G network that requires power. Eventually it comes into your home, or maybe it comes into your mobile over 4G. If it comes into your home, it comes through your router, that requires power, comes into your laptop which requires power, loads up on your screen. What level of brightness has that person got on their screen? Anyway, as soon as you start to think about the full scope of it, you realize, blimey, that's implausibly difficult and probably not worth the time to spend to work it out. There's a wonderful website called websitecarbon.com, which lots of people may be familiar with, and they've open sourced all their code as well, and there's some an analytics package called Cabin that uses the same thing, and that uses a piece of research that was done a few years ago to come up with a figure of 1.8 kilowatt hours per gigabyte of transfer. So that we're comparing apples to apples, we've got this number of 1.8 kilowatt hours generated per gigabyte of data transfer. Now, as a techie, if you overthink of that, you can find lots of ways that data transfer is a fundamentally flawed way of doing it. It's perfectly possible to have a highly server intensive process that serves up a small amount of data, right, and vice versa. But again, we've got to have something. Then we have to convert, so that's fine. So we can measure page weight. We can measure how many kilobytes of a page is, or a video stream is, and we can convert it to kilowatt hours. Then we have to convert that into tons of CO2. Now, converting kilowatt hours into emissions is difficult as well, because every country has a different grid emission factor. So the UK is around about 0.23. So that's depending on the amount of renewable energy supplied to the grid of that country, will adjust the grid emission factor. So the UK is pretty good. The US is less good. There's also a global average. Now, website Carbon and most of these sorts use actually as a starting point the kind of global average, because if you think about that data transmission I've talked about, maybe it's from a US server.
Yeah.
Now, maybe that's traveled through the US, maybe that's gone through a few European countries and then into the UK. So even if you accept the fundamentally flawed starting point of doing it on data transfer, it's then really difficult also, even just to transfer into. So the first thing I would say, and there are tools, but websitecarbon.com, brilliant starting point. Bang on a web page, it will tell you, it will give you the emissions, whether it's on green hosting. Read up a little bit on how that works, because what's really important, whether you're talking about a company's carbon footprint or the carbon footprint of a website, it is the Wild West out there. Like, my tools are available. There's other models that they're great. They're based on a lot of science, but it is a mixture of very complex science and estimations and dark art and magic. And so that we're comparing apples to apples, we've got to have something, and then we've got to just be transparent with how we're doing it. So yes, fine, the internet has a larger carbon footprint than the airline industry, but to your point about technology saving us, it's really much more interesting and nuanced than that. Yes, we should build lower carbon digital platforms. Why not? Or why invest? Well, why invest? Well, because the things that you do to reduce the carbon footprint of a website are the things that you do to make it better, faster, cheaper, improve conversions, and reduce your hosting costs anyway. So if you take a user journey and you take it from 8 steps to 4, you've halved the carbon footprint. If you halve the page weight, or double the, halve the page load speed, you've halved it again. Now, both of those things will almost certainly improve conversions, user experience, make it cheaper to host and store, blah blah blah. So we're kind of doing it anyway, we're just not measuring it. And the world is missing the equivalent of the accessibility guidelines, which we've had for 20 plus years, which means that we're kind of we're duty bound, legally bound to build web pages and experiences for a whole range of people with all sorts of different kind of impairments, and but we just don't have that for sustainability. So the Green Pages is a low carbon website that is just a curated set of resources like Website Carbon and Cabin Analytics in terms of the measurement, and a whole range of tools for as I mentioned, any digital team in an agency within any organization, whether you're a UX or a designer, an engineer, an architect, an infrastructure person, you're thinking about placing ad content, media, thinking about the carbon footprint of those ad campaigns. There are tools there to do it, and have conversations with your clients about how you might offset that campaign. Now, here's the nuance bit. Like, that's a good thing to do, right? If we all went out and did that. And here's an example. This is the sort of thing I think you'll see over the next 5 years. Netflix, wouldn't it be cool if they had a green mode, right? They're constantly pumping super high definition, the next mega high definition. I don't know what the next one is. As much as they're pumping this down, and great. And most of us can't necessarily tell like a huge difference. Wouldn't it be cool if they had a green mode where it just dropped it down a little bit, and every month they sent me an update just saying, hey James, thanks for watching in green mode, you've just saved 15 tons of 15 kilos of CO2. But we love that, and I think you'll see that in YouTube and something, and I think people cleverer than me will find interesting ways to get that message across to consumers on websites, because we all like to go and buy our Oatly milk because it's 3 grams less CO2. We don't really know what that means, or it's wrapped up in the green packaging and it sounds good. So consumers really like that. So there's a real kind of win-win-win for building lower carbon digital experiences. The nuance bit, and then I'll now shut up for a bit, is, of course, unlike the airline industry where the benefit is cheap air travel and I can go on holiday, I can get to places quickly. For a digital platform, yes, it has a footprint, often it has a benefit, and that's on a spectrum. So, this video call is a great example, relatively high footprint because we're streaming video. But previously, I might have traveled down to London and we would have got together and had a panel discussion, and that would have been massively higher. So again, people cleverer than me will find creative ways, I think, to tell consumers not just how much lower the footprint of the platform is, but also thinking about customer experience mapping and how that digital experience relates to offline touch points, which is something we've been doing for years, starting to bring in carbon footprint and thinking about that. That's kind of layer 2. And the final third layer is you can, I think, start to have fun in some cases with those grid emissions again. So there are lots of really cool and simple APIs available, and you can get these off the green pages to, in real time, find out what the national grid emissions are. So if we take the UK, for example, I mentioned it's kind of 0.23, so sort of kilograms per kilowatt hour, but that changes that's an average over the year. During the day, if it's sunny and windy, then we're really, really good, and vice versa if it's kind of cold, still, dark evening. So wouldn't it be fun to have a website that changed its behavior based on the grid emissions and in that country? So there are some obvious examples in the IoT world. So you could have an air conditioning system that, if the grid emissions dropped below a certain threshold, it cut out for 30 minutes. People probably wouldn't notice that much, but you could have a very green as on the more kind of PR stunt side of things, wouldn't it be cool to have a website that, if the grid emissions dropped below a certain threshold, it went into dark mode, right? Black pages require less power than white pages on a monitor. So that might be more of a kind of gimmicky awareness thing. But again, cleverer UX people will think of cool ways along that spectrum to do that. Those are the 3 layers I think about, and that's why it's different to the airline industry, because yes, it has a footprint, but yes, it can have significant benefits on top of that. And then the third layer is that kind of actually changing the experience dynamically based on grid emission factors.
Yeah,
was that an answer to a question? I don't know. That was sorry.
I mean, it was an answer to the question and many others. Yeah, but that's good. That's what we're here for, James. A good rambling chat about the subject. I mean, so a couple of things that I'll pull out from that. Dark mode is saving the planet, everybody. You heard it here first. It's not just a superior experience. You are actually saving the planet by providing it and using it. So please, dark mode in all your user experiences, everybody. Slightly joking, but it's kind of true, actually. But I love the suggestion that maybe there's a third mode coming. Maybe there's a green mode for things. I think that's a really good idea, actually. How many customers would elect to use green mode in their experiences? I think a lot of
We have
people
it
would.
switched on right now, right? I mean, you know, it's an environment. If Teams had a green mode, we'd say to everybody, look, we're not streaming in high definition. The last thing you want is high definition, you know, me and Rob in your face anyway. So let's back it in green mode. Like, why wouldn't we? So I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm claiming that, right? You heard it here first. We can date stamp. We've got a date stamp on this when it starts to come. But look, you know, that's what we're trying to do with the green page, is what we're trying to do by getting out there into the community, and sharing all these kind of ideas and thoughts.
Yeah, it's
And
provoking, isn't it? It provokes people to think differently about the work that they do and the context within which they do it. And I think, you know, you talked about the Netflix example. You know, Netflix notoriously have teams of people whose entire job is focusing on how content is laid out in the interface on different screen sizes. And the joke, of course, is it means they have a 6-inch guy and a 9-inch guy and a 12-inch guy, right? And that is genuinely the internal like monkey as they give them. I'd love to imagine that they might already have a team of people whose entire focus is thinking about how they can make the delivery of the platform have a lower footprint, right? In terms of how they serve up content.
they
And
must be thinking about this. It's such an obvious one for them, and you know, and there's been a spotlight on it for a few years now, and there's reports out there, and there's committees looking particularly at video streaming services, because obviously they are a very large chunk of that footprint. So I hope so. I'd be really surprised if we kind of didn't see something like that. You know, from them.
And I think that leads us into the consumer angle, which you sort of touched on in a few areas. I think, you know, and I guess I sort of what I was alluding to at the top of the hour. It's like consumers have started to care. There's a public shift in consciousness, and I think what's really interesting about that is it means that brands and businesses, whether their leadership teams agree with or care about this subject or not, are being really forced, I guess, ultimately to start to do things in this area. And you know, we get into the greenwashing debate here pretty quickly, I suppose, about, you know, if is it a positive thing for businesses to be able to sort of slightly insincerely do the minimum possible amount and therefore get the kind of consumer benefit from that or not? And you know, that is a very complicated debate. My personal view is largely, as long as people are doing something, that's better than doing nothing, and as long as they're being transparent about what they do, then it's up to the consumer to make the decision. But you know, do you think sustainability has become a marketing term? Maybe we could lean into B Corp a bit here, which I know is another journey you've been on. How do you see that sort of shaking out at the moment?
Yeah, look, again, I'm in a bit of a bubble, you know, so I'm very optimistic and positive, and I'm working with lots of people, you know, who are hugely passionate, and so I sometimes get maybe a slightly skewed view. But what I tend to feel like is like, no, sustainability is, you know, and in the broader term, not just the environmental piece, has moved, you know, since sort of, I guess, pre 2008, or certainly in the last few years, has moved from this kind of CSR, corporate social responsibility thing that the C-suite said, yeah, we need to be doing that, and then it was fobbed off probably to HR, to something that is a much more kind of strategic pillar, not just for a big car manufacturer who's like, well, look, if we don't strategically change our business from diesel to electric, we're dead. But, you know, all the way through, you know, MSQ, like huge kind of board support. But I see that, you know, with all of the companies that I'm working with, and it is, you know, it is a relatively small bubble. It's not to say that it isn't used by marketing, of course. Like, you know, in order, you've got to play the game, you know, and there are huge commercial benefits to operating in this way. My hope genuinely is that in 5 years' time, certainly 10, it flips the other way, and those commercial benefits are all gone, and it's the other way round. If you're not doing it, you're just not going to survive. You're going to be dead in the water because everybody's doing it. It's not a USP to say, hey, we're you know, climate positive or whatever. It's just like, whatever, no big deal. But in the short term, there are like huge benefits, whether it's, you know, being greener with your website, getting that information across to customers, whether it's being a carbon negative organization in your own right, you know, whatever you're doing, like, yes, you know, push the marketing out there. I think more and more companies will get called out for greenwashing if they're not, as people do more and more. You know, and I'm not going to name names, but I've seen companies who like have done big promotional videos to talk about how last year they planted over 300 trees. You know, and you look at that when you go, oh, that's great. Like, we planted a forest, planted a tree for every member of staff, and it's like, okay, but it's 12p to 12 pence to plant a tree on something like Ecologi. I think you spent, I don't know what is that, 30 quid, 40 quid, I don't know. But so companies get called out if they're just kind of greenwashing. But look, at the moment, it's the best way to kind of get funding for these big sustainability initiatives. And so, yeah, like, you know, looking at things like, you know, B Corp, which is, you know, becoming more and more popular and is broader. Is that back to what we talked about before? Is that kind of, it's covering ethics, diversity and inclusion, you know, and all the environmental stuff, is becoming a proper kind of strategic pillar of how an organization is run, and is getting, you know, real time at the board table. And, you know, the work certainly we're doing at MSQ, our carbon footprint on a sort of per head basis, the offsetting that we're doing, the targets that we've got to halve that over 3 years, those are KPIs that are reported up to the board and sit alongside, you know, our EBITDA and our turnover. You know, those are, you know, targets, and we're doing everything that we can meet them alongside everything else. So yes and no, it is used by marketing teams, but it's not just, you know, it's much more than that. Companies that are just greenwashing and just talking the talk but not doing it aren't going to survive, really, or they're just going to get called out very quickly and look stupid.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this is all part of the kind of public consciousness waking up a bit, you know, whereas planting one tree for every, you know, month of the year might have seemed like an exciting and amazing thing to do a year ago. I think people now are like, well, hang on a minute, I've got an ecology subscription and I'm planting 300 trees a month, so that can't be that good. You know, like people are just becoming aware of what the scale of impact needs to look like to truly make a difference, and certainly what's appropriate for a large organization. And so I never want to like talk down about people doing the kind of silly, oh, you know, we'll plant one tree for every X stuff, because it's better than planting no trees. But equally, I think I agree with you that I hope that stuff comes out in the wash anyway, because consumers become wiser and more savvy. But I do think,
yeah, I agree. I just not about just on that point, Rob. I think definitely like my approach is just, you know, not about shaming those companies, but helping to educate. Sometimes it's just sort of, you know, naivety. They've done something, their marketing team's pushing it out. There's a disconnect. They probably didn't realize how, you know, cheap it was, or whatever it is, and it's more about just dropping them a private note and just saying, hey, like, you know, can we help? I've got these resources, this course, you know, whatever. But, you know, by the way, we've done X, Y, and Z, because they soon kind of realize that, you know, that they're potentially looking a bit daft, and they're going to end up with some blowback if they're not careful.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted.
No, not at all. Yeah, I agree. And so I suppose just touching briefly on the kind of cloud context in a little bit more detail, my long-term belief has been that, you know, moving technology into these kind of hyperscaled, centralized facilities, which is public cloud today, is positive from a sustainability point of view, because you can find efficiency through scale. It's a bit like the electric vehicle argument, right? Just a lot of electricity is still derived from fossil fuel, but it's done much more efficiently at scale than it can be done in small batches burning in, you know, in a combustion engine. Do you buy that, the cloud argument? Do you agree with that? Like, would you tell a business moving to cloud is a sustainable choice versus the alternatives? What's your view there?
Yeah, look, it's another one of those win-wins. It's about understanding the data, and again, it's a bit, you know, loose, but depending on how you measure the scope of that carbon footprint, you know, data centers are, you know, only, you know, 10-20% when you think about all the other kind of power that comes through. But that, again, take those numbers with a pinch of salt, because people measure different things and different scopes, and it depends on the application. but look, absolutely, it's a win-win. All the big cloud providers, AWS and Google and Microsoft, etc., and the mid-tier kind of sizable data centers. There's rack spaces in the UK Fast and whoever you use, but are investing and moving quickly towards green energy. You hear Microsoft talking about looking at not just green energy, but can they put data centers underwater and all sorts of weird and wonderful things in order to reduce electricity usage, because obviously cooling and things is a huge element of it. So unquestionably, it's a great thing to do to sort of migrate into the cloud. I just think it's a win-win with all the other benefits that come with clouds, anyway, in terms of cost and for me kind of security. And this is your world more than me. People kind of get a bit sort of out with but if we can go and physically see the box in our own data center, then we can control the security. And it's like, but how good are you at making sure it's always patched and always updated and always upgraded? These guys are obsessed with data breaches. It's everything they do. So I think for me, it's just win-win-win. Security, cost, scalability, all of the benefits of going to cloud, plus yes, that the environmental bit. They're all looking and transitioning to green energy. You'll see that a lot over the next few years.
Yeah, they certainly are. And the Microsoft Sunken Data Center project, for those that haven't seen it, is worth Googling for. They did an initial pilot and it was successful, and they're now trying a kind of second pilot where they basically built a sort of modest scale data center and put it in a kind of big steel tube, for want of a better word, and submerged it in the ocean in an attempt to derive completely efficient cooling from the ocean's temperature. I must say my mind did shift to the thought of, are we going to end up boiling the ocean with data centers? But that's probably I think there's probably enough water for it not to matter. But anyway, joking aside, I think it's just a really cool example of companies pushing the boundaries and exploring what's possible. And I mean, we're in an age where we're watching SpaceX rockets increasingly successfully take off with huge payloads. It seems sort of inevitable to me that the long-term answer to a lot of this stuff is space, really. It's moving a lot of this stuff off planet eventually. We may not be alive to see it, but it seems like it gets there eventually. So I guess, again, what I'm getting at is I think tech saves us if we can survive long enough. I think we need to take action today, because if we don't, I'm not convinced we will be around for long enough for the technology to get there. But I do think the technology ultimately does get there. So in that gap we're in now, you talked about that kind of legacy emotion with children. It's amazing how often that seems to be the trigger point for people realizing, hang on, what are we leaving behind for our kids? I think that's the reason why ultimately the time to take action is now, because we need to create a big enough buffer for the tech solutions to really kick in earnest and start to solve these problems comprehensively. So look, it's been a fantastic rambling chat. We've got a few minutes left. What else is there you'd like to cover or promote or share that perhaps we've not had a chance to talk about yet?
No, I think maybe we could just sort of come back and condense it into those two areas of like what action could you take. Look, on your point, I think we're really aligned with the, either you believe we're all doomed, or you kind of Elon Musk style, look, let's just give him enough time to colonize Mars and it'll all be okay. And there's lots of little things that I'm doing and we're doing to support SMEs. Those of you saw the Bill Gates documentaries last year, I think it was, that stuff, like TerraPower. So have you seen like this design that they have for clean, green, nuclear energy that actually uses existing nuclear waste? And they show this lovely shot of, I think it's a facility in Turkey that has enough nuclear waste to power the US for the next 100 years or something. So there are these big technology projects governments are doing, private sector's doing. But in terms of what we can do, I presume lots of people watching are more in the kind of SME world, small businesses. You can get moving really quickly, and I'll give Ecologi a plug, because actually, although I think you should absolutely start by, you need to measure your carbon footprint, because you can't put a sensible reduction strategy in place unless you understand the profile of it, as I talked about before. Otherwise, you're just moving deck chairs around. But if you want to get started super quickly while you're doing that, because that can take a few weeks or months to do, sign up to something like Ecologi as a business. It's incredibly cost effective, incredibly cheap. Tomorrow, you could be a climate positive organization. Use the commercial benefits that come with that. Stick the logo on your pitch decks, on your websites, on your email. Brilliant. Just get tree planting. It's brilliant internally. Staff love it. It helps with recruitment. Lots and lots and lots of benefits. Do that. There's a bit opposite way around. Then do your measurement. You can always go back and adjust how much offsetting you've done. That's fine. Jump on netcarbonnegative.co.uk if you like. There's quite a lot of stuff on there, but the thing you're looking for is the carbon calculator. It's just a very simple spreadsheet. You drop in some data and it will give you your scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. Most of it you'll get from your finance teams. You do a simple survey around commuting, bang, you've got it. That will really help you see how, where are the big gains? How can we now halve our footprint over the next 3-4 years? So measure it, put in a strategy to reduce it. And then, those again, I would think most people watching this are interested on the tech side, the digital side. Have a look at the green pages. We'll share the link. That's thegreenpages.bima.co.uk. Pass that on to your digital teams, your designers, your developers, your infrastructure people. As I say, it's very simple. It's just a curated set of resources. All teams that I've shared that with have just gone, oh, great. Yeah, this is really easy. We're sort of doing this stuff anyway. We're just not measuring it. We're just not thinking about it, so your UX designers are just sticking high-res hero banners at the top of every page and not going, well, is the kind of benefit of that like really shiny call to action, misty video background to our homepage worth the footprint? We're just not thinking about it, but we're doing a lot of the stuff anyway. So, have a look at the green pages. That'll allow you to really kind of build up that capability for within your own teams or for your clients, whatever type of business you are. So we've waffled on a lot. I think that there are some really quick win starting points. Jump on something like Ecologi, become climate positive tomorrow. If you're a service business, it's crazy cheap. Net carbon negative to measure and start to reduce. The green pages to focus on supercharge that capability around the building more sustainable platforms.
Love it. And if you're not using cloud services already because you're a lunatic, then now's the time to start. And if you build a website or you have any influence over the building of a website and you're watching this or listening to it, get a green mode put on your website. And I'll tell you what, I'll plant 100 trees for everybody that sends me a screenshot or frankly a working demonstration of a website with a green mode on it, because I just think that's such a cool idea, and I'd love it if that became a thing, and I'd love it even more if we could attribute it to you, James. So yeah, wouldn't that be
well,
incredible?
let's pretend it was
green
my
modes
idea.
Start popping up.
Okay.
And I'm sure someone's frantically making 100 websites now to teach me a lesson for saying that, but I'm okay with that. That's all right. James, thank you so much for your time and everything you're doing in this area. You've been so generous with the resources you've created for your own challenges, and I really think that's what these types of challenges in our lives need. They need people like you who are incredibly switched on and figure out how to solve these problems, and then give it away, give it back to the planet, open source it, right? And I just think it's so amazing that these resources exist now. And whether that's tools like Ecologi or all the amazing work that you've done with Net Carbon Negative, or the amazing green pages work with BIMA and everything in between, these are the building blocks that make it easy for people to do something about it should they wish to. And so if you've enjoyed watching this or you've enjoyed listening to it, do something, take action, right? It's so easy, it's very, very cheap, and your teams will appreciate it, your customers certainly will appreciate it, and it's and hopefully we'll all have a slightly longer and happier life as a result. So James, thank you so much, and thanks to everybody watching and listening along. That was Wirelive episode 12. I'm going to go and clean up my garden. Thanks everybody.